is the world famous Avenue of Oaks. These are live oaks. Now they're called live oaks because their leaves never die. They remain green year round and they produce leaves year round. The avenue was planted back in 1743 by Thomas Boone. Thomas was the oldest son of John and Elizabeth Boone, our founders. And Thomas is actually buried here on the property. You're going to see his grave marker here in just a moment. Getting back to the live oaks for just a second, though, it takes about 150 years for live oak trees to stretch across and create this beautiful canopy that's over us right now. And I'll pan up just a little bit, let you look at that canopy. Isn't that gorgeous? Now that is Spanish moss hanging out of the branches. Spanish moss is an air plant. It is not a parasite to the tree. It will not harm it. Spiders and chiggers and things of that nature tend to make their home inside Spanish moss. So if you decide to take some with you as a souvenir, just check it. Make sure that you're not taking home any little critters with you. Oh, we've got some event trucks coming out. Boone Hall is a very popular wedding event, so we've got some event trucks setting up, it looks like. Now, I'm going to pan over just a little bit, but I'll get a closer view of this later. This is Thomas Boone's grave over here beside us. I'll get you a better look at that here in just a little bit. And the horse pasture, there are horses that stay in that pasture. They are not owned by Boone Hall. They are privately owned by another family that rents out these stables, and they are polo playing horses. We'll get a better view of those too in just a moment. Just want to let you take a look at this beautiful drive-in, and now the house is coming into view. And of course, the slave cabins over here as well. We're going to take a closer look at those here in just a few moments.
And now, a history of the Boone Plantation.
Bit. We do know that this house was built on the same footprint as that old house. We know that it had a library in that same spot that library is in right now. The dining room is directly across the foyer. We're going to be looking at the outside of that in just a moment. We know that there was a dining room in that exact spot in that old house as well. So this house is built on that same footprint of that old house. Now, John Boone came over here in 1681 via Barbados. He's originally from Devon, England. John came over via a land grant given to him by his owner at the time. He came over as an indentured servant. Many of the white settlers were indentured servants over in Barbados for a number of years before coming over here, and he was an indentured servant for 11 years in Barbados. So he comes over here, he's worked off that indentured servitude, and he's got a grant of land. But now his grant of land was down the river just a little ways. The man that originally owned this piece of property, his name was Patey. His last name was Patey, and he had a daughter by the name of Elizabeth. The acreage given to John Boone by Mr. Patey was Elizabeth's marriage dowry. That's an amount of land or a home or some type of good given to a man as a gift or as payment for marrying his daughter. Women were property as well back then. Now, the Boones themselves had 7 children, but only 5 made it to see adulthood. And out of those 5 children, Thomas was the oldest. He's the one responsible for planting the Avenue of Oaks. We'll skip ahead just a little bit past their kids and get to one of their grandkids. The Boones had a great-granddaughter by the name of Sarah. Sarah, when she was 14 years of age, married a man by the last name of Rutledge. By the time she was 25, they had 8 children together. Her oldest son's name was John. Her youngest son's name was Edward. If those names sound a little bit more familiar than John Boone's name did, there's a very good reason for that. John and Edward Rutledge were signers of each, our Declaration and our Constitution. John, being the oldest son of Sarah's, was a signer of the Constitution and wrote the Stamp Act. He was also one of the first judges appointed to the Supreme Court by George Washington. Edward, being that youngest son, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, has a statue of himself outside of Independence Hall in Philadelphia as being the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence at the age of 27. Now, Sarah had 8 kids, and it came time she was getting her last will and testament together, long around 1812 to be exact, and She wants to split up the land between all 8 of her children. There were, at that point in time, 1,200 acres, able to split very easily among 8 children. Well, they didn't like that. They were all arguing over it. They sued each other, took each other to court several times because each one of those kids wanted the land for themselves. They didn't want to split it with all their brothers and sisters. So Sarah, in true Southern mom fashion, decides not to give it away to any of them. She sells all 1,200 acres for $12,000 and kicks everybody off the land. Now, when Sarah, that great-granddaughter of the Boones, sold the house, when she sold that acreage, she sold to 2 brothers, the Horlbecks. They're originally from Germany. Their mom and dad actually owned a plantation down the road called Laurel Hill. They were already in the brick-making business, and that was their main purpose for wanting this land. They wanted all the clay that we're sitting on here at Boone Hall, and they grew that business very well by purchasing Boone Hall Plantation. They brought with them about 350 slaves, and those enslaved people pumped out more than 1 million brick per year out of Boone Hall brickyards, one of the biggest brick operations running in the country at that point in time. Now, when the Horlbecks were purchasing the property and when they had that brick company and that construction company going, there was already some talk all over Charleston and really all over the country that slavery would probably come to an end, and it would probably come to an end within their lifetime. So everyone in the Charleston area, including those Horlbeck brothers, trying to come up with the next cash crop. What was going to be next for Charleston? What can we make money off of next? So when they purchased that land from Sarah, one of those Horlbeck brothers was extremely smart. So he decided to go out on the plantation and he planted 15,000 pecan trees. Pecans became the next cash crop. That was a cash crop that didn't require a lot of labor. They could get away from that slave labor with that particular crop. Boone Hall became one of the largest producers of pecans in the world. Millions and millions of pecans were exported out of the port of Charleston and grown right here at Boone Hall Plantation by those Horlbeck brothers until 1911, when a big hurricane hit Charleston and pretty much destroyed that pecan orchard. You follow that up with the stock market crash. That's going to pretty much put the nail in the coffin for the Horlbecks. That's going to put them out of business. So in 1935, they sell to our next owner, Sir Thomas Stone. Sir Thomas Stone did not want to farm. He just simply wanted to live on a plantation. That's all he wanted. He was a Canadian diplomat from Quebec, wanted to buy his wife a plantation. They wanted to move down south and retire. And this is what he built with that old house. He built this house for his wife, an anniversary present. Nice anniversary present, if you ask me. And they lived here until World War II, when he was asked to come back and perform his duties once again as a diplomat in Canada. So then he sells to, of all people, a Russian prince. Dmitri Georgiadze buys the place, and he decides he wants to race thoroughbred racing horses. Now, after a pretty bad marriage, Dmitri decides to sell the place and get out of horse racing for good. He then starts owning hotels. He becomes a very prominent hotel owner. As a matter of fact, he owned the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and he did own it at that particular time. He sells to a local family by the last name of Days. They came over and made the place a cattle operation for a few years. They were very successful here. But in 1955, the Days family sold to the current owners today, the McCrae family. McCrae family were peach farmers at the time, bought the place to grow peaches here. Not growing peaches too much anymore, but growing a lot of other crops out here on the plantation. Boone Hall Farms is one of the longest continually working farms in the country. Been growing crops here since the 1690s and still are today.
This has been a history of the Boone Plantation.
So when we first pulled up, as you can see, there's this sign right here that points to the parking area. There it is. There's this sign right here that points to the parking area. And we, of course, went over there and parked. But right beside it is the Hospitality Center. Now you're going to go to the Hospitality Center. There it is, right there. You're going to go there first and book that house tour. There's also restrooms in there. You're also going to find informational brochures on other places to go see in Charleston. Let's take a trip in there and I'll show you guys around. Over here you've actually got some photos of
the previous house. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Some neat photographs here. And a photo of some descendants of John Boone visiting. Those slave cabins are the original structures built in the 1700s with those handmade bricks. The people that lived inside of them were the people that built them. Okay, now let's head into the slave cabins. Each one of these cabins is a little bit different, has a little bit of a different display inside each one. So let's go in, take a look around. Now, each slave cabin was said to house a family. Really depended on how many people were in your family. If you had a smaller family, it could be 2 to 3 families. Usually, children sleeping up top. You'll see in another cabin where they actually made little beds to put up in the top for the children, and adults sleeping on the floor or even on the dirt on the ground down below.
Speaking and advocating nonviolent protests against racial discrimination. In 1963, 100 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, Dr. King organized a march on Washington, D.C. that drew an estimated 200,000 people demanding equal rights for minorities. This battle led to the enlistment of many blacks in the North, a key development to which Abraham Lincoln attributed his ultimate success. It is, however, to be noted that there were blacks in the Confederate Army as well. Even though it was not, even up until the 1940s, people lived in these cabins and worked here at Boone Hall. As many as 15,000 pecan trees. Workers came from miles around and will get paid weekly based on the amount of pecans they harvested. Storms destroyed most of the pecan trees, but once again Boone Hall adapted, and today is one of America's oldest working plantations. The property of their master. Boone Hall used a combination of the two systems, depending on whether they were in the fields or maybe making bricks in the brickyard. Workers would spend 12 hours a day in the cotton fields and longer during harvest. Men, women, and children worked, with children considered half-hands until they were 12 years old. Administer severe punishments as an example to other slaves, especially if it was a captured runaway slave. Forms of punishment would include flogging, dismemberment. The abolition movement had gained strength and was a significant part of turning the opinion of slavery in the North, which ultimately gave support to the Civil War. With the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 and the fact that the South had seceded from the Union, tensions were on the rise, with the topic of slavery being on the front lines. On April 12, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War were fired here in Charleston at Fort Sumter. And on January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves within the rebellious states of the South.
Fellas, the blacksmiths, they made the gates and things, butlers, maids, cooks, carriage drivers, seamsters, tailors, gardeners, oh yeah, all them fellas and their special skills. They were the privileged ones to live in the brick. But now if you and your family were just regular field slaves, meaning you worked the cotton, the indigo, the tomatoes, the corn, the cabbage, the rice, then you would be living in what we call a board house. And your board house was just that, made of board, half the size of this brick cabin, dirt floor, no window, no fireplace, and your board house would have been located way out in the field, a good distance behind the master's house. They called them quarters, slave quarters. Now that's just how it was back in the day. Not only did they work the brick here, not only did they farm the land, but they also planted pecan trees and harvested pecans. By the early 1900s, this plantation was the #1 retailer of pecans than any other business all over the world. In 1911, there were some 15,000 pecan trees standing here in 3 separate pecan groves. And in the month of November of 1911, a mighty, mighty, mighty big no-name storm came through, taking down some 12 to 13,000 of those pecan trees, dropping this plantation to the bottom when it came to production. But of course, the family got discouraged, seeing all their money, the trees on the ground, but they decided to sell the plantation, and they sold it to the family that was helping them clear the land, the lumber company. Well, that family kept it for a few years. Our men made the big coiled work baskets that are about half the size of this barrel to my right. But now, when our men were weaving, they were actually using split oak and white oak bark. And our women found that just to be too harsh on their fingers. So the women were already putting the sweetgrass in their straw brooms, and they began to put it in their baskets. Thus, we started calling them sweetgrass baskets. Now, we call this grass sweet because when it is green and growing, it has a very, very, very sweet odor to it. But once this is pulled and dried out, it begins to smell like regular old hay. And we pull the sweetgrass from our swamps and our beachfronts. And added to the sweetgrass is a material we call bulrush. Same material that went into making Moses' basket. And we pull the bulrush from right out here in the marsh. You see it growing. Now, the plus with the bulrush is that it puts more weight to your basket, but it can also wreak havoc on the fingers when used a lot. And that's the dark brown straw that you see going along the sides of this basket. And in the center of this basket, you will see 2 rows of a cinnamon-colored straw. Those are the longleaf pine needles. In South Carolina, we have long needle pine trees and short needle pine trees, and the pine was actually added for color, and we use the long needle pine because it goes a lot further. And last but not least, the state tree of South Carolina is our palmetto tree. You will see the palmetto tree, not the palm, the palmetto. You will see our palmetto tree on our state flag. We take the leaves off those palmetto branches, we split those leaves in half, and we call it maida. Palmetto maida. Well, the maida is what does the final wrappings of our baskets, and the maida is also what makes up our palmetto roses. When you see our women, men, and children weaving, you will see them using one instrument, and we call it a nail bone. Well, the old folks call it a nail bone because back in the day they were actually using the rib bone of a pig or a cow. Then they went to the use of a nail. Today, the nail bone, and now they call it the spoon handle of the needle, is basically the bottom part of a tablespoon, teaspoon, or fork, the handle. They weld off the handle and a portion of the handle, flatten the ends of that handle, file it until it almost looks like an arrowhead. And now one arrowhead instrument, their right and left hands and materials, and what's make the beautiful baskets you see. The most unique piece that I've seen was a baby carriage done with the hood, with all the materials except for the legs and the wheels. Now out here at Highway 17, the state of South Carolina has deemed the north side of this bridge as a Sweetgrass Basket Weavers Highway. You will see basket stands on both sides of our highways, some in front of their homes, some in front of their churches, some set up in the parking lots of our shopping centers. Feel free to stop by and purchase a basket of your choice. Now, you do get a greater selection of size and style along that highway, but your cheaper baskets are usually purchased here at the plantation or at the Boone Hall Farm Market. And the market is actually left at the gate or left at the light, a few hundred yards up on your right, general store, cafe, and gift shop. But now, if you decide to go to historic downtown Charleston, just be prepared to pay historic money for your historic baskets. That's all. They always have a couple of zeros when you go across the bridge, but you do get a greater selection. But they do have a lot of their baskets on sale this time of the year, especially when us getting ready to go into the new year. Gonna lay down me burdens. Help me out. Down by the riverside. Come on. Down by the riverside. Way down. Down by the riverside. Why don't you lay down?
Okay, so we're going to start out by looking at the gardens out here in front of the house, and you're looking back at a circular shaped building. That is the smokehouse. It is made of handmade bricks. It's actually the oldest brick structure in South Carolina. It's where all the meat would be smoked and cooked for the winter. And we are along the banks of the Wando River. You can see it just a little bit right past the trees. Going to come around and show you the house. Look at all the butterflies. This is actually called the Butterfly Garden, not because butterflies are here all the time, but if you were to look at the gardens or this area from an aerial standpoint, the walkway going up to the house would be the body of the butterfly, the house would be the head of the butterfly, and then the gardens are actually shaped like wings of a butterfly. But we're going to get over here beside the house, and I'll tell you what you're going to be looking at. When you enter the home, you go into a foyer with a grand staircase. This first area, you're going to go in the door and to the left. That is the library. Now, you're only allowed to tour the first floor, not the second floor. That is a private residence. Now, if you want to talk a little bit about haunted things, now granted, I've never felt like there was any type of especially bad spirit here in Boone Hall, but supposedly up in this window is where a ghost can be seen occasionally. Right here is where people have reported seeing some funny looking stuff up there. But I do want to show you one thing. If you turn around from the back of the house, you see this gorgeous, gorgeous live oak that we're coming up on right now. This is actually the oldest live oak on the property. It is estimated to be around 600 years old. We at Boone Hall call this the wedding tree. Lots of couples get engaged out here. And we're at the back of the house. If we zoom in just a little bit over to your right, right through those windows, that is that library that we saw in the very front. Coming back around, you end up in the back of the house when you're on your house tour at the loggia. Loggia is an Italian word that means covered breezeway. And then back in the very back, you have Thomas Stone's study. It's more of like a man cave, so to speak. There's the parking lot over there. That's where we started out. Then you're going to see an amphitheater. The amphitheater is used for several things throughout the year. Many events are held here at Boone Hall, and they're usually in this particular area. There are a few benches back here in the back if you just like to come out and sit by the river, take in the tide. It's a very beautiful spot to just come hang out for a little bit. Okay, y'all, that wagon ride was really, really bouncy, and I was not able to film a lot on it, but I do encourage you to come out and take that. It shows you what they're doing now on the farm and how it is still a currently working plantation. Boone Hall is located off of Highway 17 on Long Point Road. The farm itself can be accessed, the farmer's market, that pumpkin patch, that can all be accessed off of Highway 17. If you're going north toward Georgetown, it'll be on your left. So just to give you some bearings there, if you're coming across the Ravenel Bridge, it's going to be on your left-hand side when you make that turn onto 17. Come out here, enjoy yourself. I have to say, I've spent some time inside that hospitality center helping people plan their day a little bit. I've had people come in and tell me they only have 2 hours. I highly recommend that gala performance. Those ladies are so good that do the gala performance. They do such a good job of telling you about their culture and their history. If you like the movies and you like the pop culture history side of things, it's definitely a must-do here in Charleston. North and South, starring Patrick Swayze, is at the top of my list, y'all. That's my very favorite. God bless Patrick Swayze. Queen, starring a very young Halle Berry. The Notebook, starring Ryan Gosling. But yeah, come out here, take a day trip, enjoy yourself. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll subscribe, and if there's anywhere else in Charleston you want to go check out, leave me a comment in the comment section, and I'll get that for you. Thank you again for joining. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the Chucktown Chick.